So again, welcome today. We'd like to welcome Guro Mike Casto to our FMA Chronicles, as it were. How are you doing, Guro?
Excellent.
Excellent. Good. So tell us a little bit how you got started within the Filipino martial arts, if you would.
Back in '95, a friend of mine, his name is Rick, he moved to Dayton, Ohio. We grew up together in Indiana. He grew up, and he moved to Dayton, Ohio to go to college for physical therapy. And he wound up meeting a guy named Ken Pinnell and training with him started training with him in Filipino and Indonesian martial arts in a system called Sikal. And Rick called me up and said, "You got to come check this out." I came and went to a class with him, and I was hooked. And so that was February of '95.
Gotcha. And so had you practiced martial arts prior to the Filipino martial arts?
Yeah, I started in '78 in Taekwondo as a kid. Did that for several years, and then my instructor moved away, and I wound up training in Okinawa and Guro for several more years. Then when I was a freshman in high school, my parents pulled me out of formal training because they thought it was conflicting with school.
Sure.
And so I spent the next 7 years training with my friends who were still training in Goju or Aikido or let's see, there was some Muay Thai in there. There was all kinds of stuff that just friends were training with, and we would get together pretty much every weekend and train and spar and whatnot. So I kind of kept my hand in.
Did you gain any ranking within Taekwondo?
Yeah, my let's see, I think it was a green belt.
Okay.
Which I think was 5th Q, and the terminology is was 30 years ago.
Sure.
So the terminology is a little fuzzy.
Sure.
But yeah, it was a mid-level rank.
Gotcha.
And same in Gojuru. And then I did that again, and when I was 21, I decided to get back into formal training.
I see.
And I went back to Okinawa and Gojuru because I hadn't found anything at that point that suited me better than the Goju. And so I went from white belt to green belt again. So I've done that 3 times. and then I was introduced to the Filipino and Indonesian stuff, and it felt like I was coming home. So.
What do you feel attracted you most to the Filipino martial arts that Goju or Taekwondo did not have?
Well, really, I wasn't attracted to Filipino martial arts.
Really?
No.
Okay.
I was attracted to the Indonesian, the Pencak Silat. My first take on the Filipino stuff was, okay, sticks and knives, awesome, but not worth a 2.5-hour commute.
Okay. Because
that's how far I lived away from Ken. And then he brought out the Silat, and I went, okay, I don't know what that is, but I want that. And the way Ken had the curriculum structured, we had to go through he brought out the Filipino stuff first.
Okay.
So I had to go through that to get, unless I could afford private set, I couldn't.
Right. So
I had to go through that to get to the Silat. And over time, I developed a love for the Filipino stuff. Okay. But my passion was always the Silat. And then it really wasn't until 2010 that my passion for anything in the Filipino stuff rivaled that of the Silat. I met Cacoy Canete in '98. Started training with him at seminars around the United States, and really enjoyed what he was teaching. Most of the Sikal that I got from Guro Ken was we had a strong influence from Bobby Tabuada's blend to walk,
sure,
and from Inosanto blend,
okay,
and some other influences from Nade Tortal and here and there other things, but the blend to walk and Inosanto were the strongest. I met Cacoy in '98, loved what he was doing, loved training with him at seminars, and earned rank under him. At the seminars, he would base it on what he saw me doing, whatever. And then in 2010, I went to the Philippines. I was there for 6 weeks training at the headquarters for Cacoy Doce Pares, and that really gave me a feel for the methodology behind the curriculum. Because I was there training in the group classes and saw the daily progression as opposed to the seminar material.
Right.
And I fell in love with it. And at that point, my passion for that grew and is equivalent to my Silat passion.
So when you speak of your introduction to Silat as well as to the Filipino martial arts, you mentioned a gentleman by the name of Ken. Who is Ken?
Guro Ken Pinnell. Okay. He's out of Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
He's been there for long time. He's along with a lot of others I've had the pleasure and fortune to meet. He's one of those sort of semi-hidden gems in the martial arts and in the Filipino and Indonesian martial arts communities. He's well known in certain circles, but he's not a big name at all. And outside of those circles, you would never, you'd likely never hear of him. But he's phenomenal. He's a very good practitioner in general, and he's a phenomenal teacher. He's really good at, and he sort of excels at teaching teachers, and making people who are good at passing on the knowledge.
Sure. And so he would be considered a teacher's teacher.
Very much so, yeah.
And as far as ranking is concerned, where does he rank in the level of his particular systems that he presents?
His primary is his own curriculum called Sikal. And he earned instructor rank under Dano Santo in the mid '80s.
Okay.
He hasn't continued that. He hasn't kept it current, but
right.
That was one of his first instructor ranks. His first instructor rank in Filipino arts was actually from GM Canete.
I see.
And he did the traditional Doce Pares with Juni for years. And that was the first thing he formally taught in the Filipino arts. He was introduced to Paul de Toires and Herman Sawanda in the mid '80s by Dano Santo, and he trained directly with them for a while. Was with Paul for 8 years. Didn't receive formal instructor certification, but had permission to teach the Bukti Negara.
Sure.
And then he was an instructor under Herman for a long time, and they were really close, and yeah, he was with Herman for 13, 14 years, and they had sort of drifted apart whenever Herman died, and that was really hard for Ken, but yeah, a lot of the Silat he taught was a lot of what he learned from in the Paul de Toires and the Bukti Negara, and a lot of what he learned from Herman.
Okay. So your initial ranking then within the Silat or Filipino martial arts was through Guro Ken, correct?
Ironically, no. No.
Do tell why not?
Well, we went to a seminar and I earned my instructorship under Guro Ken in Sikal in September of '99. Earlier that year, I think it was May, sometime in that year, earlier in '99, me and Guro Ken went to a seminar with Cacoy Canete, and Cacoy afterwards came up to Guro Ken, and he asked him about his background and
sure.
whatnot, and he found out that Guro Ken was no longer formally affiliated with Doce Pares, and he said, "Do you want to train under me?" And Ken said, "Yes, sir." and so Grandmaster Cacoy said, "Well, you're already beyond first dan, first degree black belt, but I only promote to that initially, and then
sure.
We'll go from there." So he promoted Ken to first degree, and then he asked Ken if Ken had any students he would recommend.
Right.
And this was I was outside talking to my wife on the phone when all that was happening. So another guy from our group, Dave, who was there, he comes running out. He says, "Mike, your Ken wants to talk to him." Okay, I go in and Ken puts his arm around me, and we're in front of Grandmaster Cacoy's at the desk, and he says, "If I were going to recommend someone, it'd be this guy." And I thought, "Oh, crap, he's volunteering me for something, right?" I'm about to get a beat down. And Cacoy pulled off his certificate, and I got my first degree black belt under him at that point.
Nice. Very nice.
So yeah, ironically, no, my first instructorship in the Filipino arts was technically Cacoy Doce Pares, but it was I considered it honorary at that point.
Sure.
And
sure.
And then I got my instructorship and my guruship under Ken in September of '99.
I see. And progressing beyond that, where did you move from there within the Filipino martial arts? Did you continue with the Canete system?
Yeah. I continued going to seminars with Grandmaster Cacoy when he was traveling around the States, and the following year in 2000, he promoted me to second dan, and I thought, okay, well, an honorary first dan is one thing, an honorary second dan, I'm not comfortable with
so
that.
much. Sure.
So I started, really kind of focusing more attention on learning the system and how it's taught.
Sure.
At this point, there are people trying to sort of define the curriculum for Cacoy Doce Pares.
Okay.
But it's still there's basically, it's more of a conceptual methodology than a specific curriculum.
So it's a floating curriculum.
Yeah. And and basically each instructor at this point, there are requirements that have to be met, but each instructor puts together the specific steps they're going to use to get to those. Meet those requirements. And like I said, there's some effort currently to standardize.
Sure.
But that's so I started really focusing on what I was getting from Cacoy, and then in 2010. Like I said, I went to the Philippines and spent 6 weeks there training at the headquarters for Cacoy Doce Pares, and I got a much better feel then for that methodology, and so since then, I still have a lot of the Inosanto blend and the blend to walk and stuff, and I still do it on occasion, but basically my stick work at this point is Cacoy Doce Pares.
Gotcha.
The blade that I teach is all from Guro Ken and Sikal, which traces its roots back to Inosanto primarily. But yeah, my stick, the stick that I teach these days is almost exclusively Cacoy Doce Pares.
Beyond the Doce Pares and beyond the Sikal, where else has your journey as a student, if you will, taken you?
A lot of different places. We were talking earlier, and I told you about my experience with Edgar Sleepy.
Yes.
I missed the opportunity to train with Edgar. I passed it up, figuring I would train with him next time he was around. And a couple of months later, he died. And at that point, I decided I wasn't going to let that happen again. And anyone I had the opportunity to train with, whether I'd ever heard of them, whether I didn't care,
right,
I would go train with them. And if I liked training with them, I would train with them again in the future. And so, it's a long list. If I restrict it to Filipino arts, and then we've got Nene Tortal, got Puno Abang Bayet.
Right.
Let's see, Ron Balicki. Who else? Everyone who taught it at your event. Wes and John, and
Sure.
It's a long list, and and I don't know, I picked up a lot of stuff from a lot of people, and it's all helped influence me and make me who I am now.
Right. So as far as when you present at seminar, when you present as an instructor, what do you feel is most prevalent within your presentation? Is it going to be defined by the audience? Is it going to be defined by what in particular you feel that day? How is that going to influence how you present at seminar?
It's kind of a meeting of those two. Partially it depends on my mood, whatever, and sometimes it's that I want to focus on something in my own development, whatever I'm working on currently.
Sure.
So I'll focus on that and bring it out and use them as sort of guinea pigs to work my way through.
Right.
But just as often it's it's been a request that's been made, or I get a vibe from them as we start teaching. I'll start going one way and they start asking questions that lead me somewhere else.
Sure.
It's sort of a meeting of those two dynamics.
Sure. And so personally, do you still reflect back to the Silat as being more of a influential art for you?
Yeah. It's it influences everything I do. My personal philosophy is from the moment I touch someone to the moment I stop touching them, as far as a real fight, they should be in pain and off balance. And the off balance part for me comes heavily from the Silat,
Okay.
and then secondarily from a system called San Chuan, and that's whether I'm striking, whether I'm locking, choking, disarming, whatever. Basically, everything I do, I'm also targeting their balance.
And you mentioned San Chuan.
Yeah.
Is that another system that have an instructorship?
Yeah. I have a secondary black belt in it. It's the founder of it, his name is Professor Joe Lansdale, and he's in East Texas, a little town called Nacogdoches. At this point, he still teaches, but he's stepped away from the day-to-day running of it. He's turned that over to one of his senior students, a guy named Coy Harry.
Okay.
And so Coy is now the official head of the system, and Professor Lansdale is still mentoring him in the background and whatever. And its specialty, Professor Lansdale also has a very diverse background, but San Chuan draws heavily. Its primary foundation is Parker Kempo for rapid fluid striking.
Sure.
Hapkido for joint locks, and Daituru Aikijujutsu for balance disruptions.
I see. So it's a culmination of all three systems then.
Yeah, and some influences from other places, including Silat and including Filipino stuff. But those are the strongest influences.
How do you feel that the San Chuan blends with the Silat and the stickwork of the Canete system?
Perfectly. It's for me going. I lived down in Nacogdoches for a couple years, training there every day and teaching at his school. And what it gave me was the joint locks that I had from Sikal. I didn't learn any new locks, but
Right.
in Sikal we had two expressions. One was from the Filipino side of it was weapon retention. So they get hold of my wrist, they're going for a disarm or a return. I don't want that. I use a
Sure.
lock to return it, right?
Sure.
And the other was the Silat, which is break it and move on.
Right.
And so there wasn't. I didn't have a lot of that gray area between, those two extremes. San Chuan, they specialize in locks not for submission, but for just
Pain compliance?
yeah. It's not really compliance per se. It's just pain.
Period.
Yeah. And it's I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, well, I don't really believe in pain compliance. I'm like, yeah, San Chuan is a different critter. It's, you forget your name, you forget you own a knife, you forget you were trying to stab me. It's a whole different level of pain, and they use it as Professor Lansdale explains it. All these things, whether it's striking, locks, chokes, sweeps, disarms, etc., they're all just pieces of pie.
Right.
It's easy to focus on one slice and think that's the entire thing, but it's not. They all work together. So your striking leads to your locks. Your locks can lead to sweeps. Your sweeps can lead to disarms.
Sure.
So it all works in tandem.
Sure. In order to get a lock, you have to soften them up in order to present the lock, and part of that's the striking.
Exactly. And the way I personally look, I've not been in a lot of fights. I know people have been in a lot more fights, but I've been in probably my fair share and maybe a little bit of someone else's. And the one thing that I can guarantee about a fight, and it's the only thing that can be guaranteed about a fight, is that the opportunity to strike will be there.
Right.
That's it. Everything else, you may or may not have the opportunity for a lock, a choke, a sweep, a disarm, a throw, whatever. The opportunity to strike will always be there if it's a physical confrontation. So the way I look at it is that striking has to be the hub, and everything else is spokes coming off of that hub. If your lock doesn't work, you hit him again. If your sweep doesn't work, you hit him again, and the hitting sets up the other things.
Right.
It opens the doors for those other opportunities.
Right. And so the locking portion of that primarily, then the grappling or the bone grappling part of that comes from the Hapkido. Then, would you say?
Yes, yeah, and some influence into that from the Daituru.
Daituru.
Although Hapkido and Daituru are Hapkido evolved from Daituru too.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's and Professor Lansdale, he's not sure of the exact time frame, but he knows that he was one of the first people in Texas and probably the United States to train in Hapkido. His instructor had trained with the founder in Korea and come to the States.
Sure.
And so Joe got it before, early on when it was still very kind of raw and hadn't incorporated a lot of the more modern elements that you see in Hapkido now.
Right. So you feel in presentation then, or actually in your methodology, that the Silat has 1/3 of your pie, the Canete system has the other third, and the Sichuan or Xinchuan.
Xinchuan, yeah.
Xinchuan has the other third.
Close. I would, and it's actually quarters because then Sikal has the fourth.
I see.
Okay. Because all my blade work comes from Sikal. The Sikal is what I do. It's everything else. Everything else is sort of, that's the foundation that I got from Guro Ken. Everything else has built on that foundation. So maybe it's more like those thirds sitting on that foundation. Those three sitting on that foundation.
Sure.
That's probably a more accurate description.
Why do you feel that you still have that you still reflect back to the Sikal?
What
is so significant outside of course, that being, as you said, your foundational art? Yeah. What do you feel brings you back to Sikal?
Really, the biggest thing is something I told Guro Ken a long time ago. It was before I had an instructorship with him. It was probably 97, 98. And we were talking, and I said, at some point I may go get an instructorship under Herman Sawanda or Dan Santo or whatever.
Whoever.
I said, but ultimately the only one that'll really mean anything to me is the one I get from you, from Guro Ken, because he's the one who spent 10,000 plus hours on the floor with me, sweating beside me, occasionally bleeding with me.
Sure.
He was the one who built that foundation. Everything else after that is, I'm learning variations on what he taught me more than anything else. I'll occasionally learn something new,
right.
But it's rare. It's what he taught me was very well rounded, and beyond that, though, one of the most significant things he taught me was how to learn, and so that carries through everything. Without him and without the training in Sikal, I couldn't have gotten where I am today. So it's a big factor.
So when you say your blade work is Sikal, where does the Sikal blade work come from?
Predominantly Inosanto blade. Predominantly Dan Inosanto's stuff. There is some of the traditional Doce Pares in it, especially in the Espadi Daga. And there's some influence from Sayak Kali. I trained in Sayak for a couple of years, and Guro Ken was trained in it for, I forget, several, and he's still affiliated with him. He's
with Chris Sayak.
Yeah, and Guro Ken is still affiliated with him. He's teaching. I think actually this past weekend he taught at an event, a Sayak event in Maryland. So he's still affiliated with him. That has some influence on the blade that I learned from him. Nene Tortal was another influence in that blade work in Sikal. So
interesting. So you said you had the opportunity to train in Sayak as well?
Yeah.
But never as an instructor, never became an instructor.
I got let's see, what was it? I got a basic level instructor for whip when I was in Sayak.
Sure.
But yeah, that was for me. It sounds almost blasphemous in the context of Southeast Asian martial arts, but I was never a blade guy.
Right. Really?
Right.
Wow.
My blade is good, far above average.
Right.
It had to be because Guro Ken, it's been his specialty for nearly 40 years in the sport.
Sure.
And so he required it. He he beat it into us, and
Right.
you know, so my blade is good, but it was never, you know, I was always the guy, you know, Guro would come up and he'd go, oh, I'm feeling fickle, let's work on either Silat or blade, vote. And everyone else was like, blade, blade, blade. I'm like, Silat, crap, guess we're going blade. You know, and that was, I was there for, you know, like I said, I mean, I grew to love the blade and the stick and the Filipino,
right.
but I was there for the Silat from day one. And so, you know, so when I got involved in SIOC, I originally got involved in it sort of by, I don't know, that thing of not missing an opportunity.
Sure.
You know, I was living in Texas. Guro Harley Elmore was hosting Tuan Chris, and I went up to the seminar, and I loved the guys. I still love, you know, all the SIOC folks that I know. It's a great group of guys, and I enjoyed the training.
Right.
And then I called Guro and I said, Guro, you know, you got to get involved with it. It's right up your alley, you know. And so then Guro King got involved in it and you know started really focusing on it. But for me, it was it was fun, but it wasn't, you know. I would prefer, if I'm going to spend money and spend time on something, I preferred it was Silat. And so it's like, yeah, not really, I'll go do this. So, yeah, you know, I certainly learned some really good stuff from SIOC, and it certainly influenced my blade especially. You know, and I love it. I respect the hell out of it. I personally believe that it is the best training progression for blade I've ever seen.
SIOC?
Yeah, it's the material is, you know, a friend of mine, you know, he told me that he was told this by Tuan Chris. When he started training with Tuan Chris said, "You're a full instructor under Dan Santo." He said, "Guro Dan has one of the most well-rounded, complete systems of martial arts in the world." He said, "I don't have anything new to teach you. The material you learn from me won't be new. What I have to offer you that's different is the methodology, the training method, the progression." He said, "That's where it's different. What we teach isn't so much. Yeah, it's you've already learned it." He said, "It's just how we put it together, how we present it, how we teach it, how we train it is the difference." And that was largely, I mean, yeah, there's, you know, because they train it all the time, they you know, they find things that I hadn't seen before, that, you know, whatever.
Right.
But it was still extension.
Essentially the same.
It's still kind of extensions, evolutions from what I had already learned from Guro Ken and the Santo background. And yeah, you know, I love the SIOC and respect it, and like I said, I know I'm still good friends with a lot of the SIOC community, and
right.
But it just wasn't for me. So I chose to focus on other things.
Gotcha. So in your progression in the future, where do you feel your ultimate, where do you feel that you belong ultimately within Filipino martial arts, and where do you feel your goal is for personal growth as well as professional growth as an instructor within martial arts as a whole?
Well, you know, I in 2010 I started working on putting together my own system. I call it the full name, which I hardly ever use because no one can wrap their mouth around it predominantly, is Anjing Gambala Pencak Silat.
Repeat that again, please.
Anjing.
Yes.
Gambala.
Okay.
Pencak Silat.
Okay. And the meaning.
The meaning. Pencak Silat is the generic umbrella term for Indonesian martial arts.
Right.
Anjing Gambala means sheepdog. And
Okay.
and that's, you know, that's why my logo has a dog's sheepdog's paw print with a karambit, right? And the name of it was inspired by an article or an essay I read years ago by Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
No, I don't.
he's written several books. The ones that I would recommend to the one I would recommend to anyone, especially martial artists, is On Combat.
Okay.
Another one is On Killing. It's more specifically targeted towards military and law enforcement.
Okay.
But both are great reads, and they cover a lot of important things. On Combat deals basically in a very generalized nutshell, deals with the physiological and psychological effects of conflict before, during, and after.
Okay.
And excellent material, excellent read, especially for a martial artist. You know, who that's the playground we thrive
Sure.
in. You know.
Sure.
But he wrote an essay called "On Sheep, Wolves, and Sheepdogs," and it breaks society down into those three archetypes.
Okay.
Sheep are most people, and you know, since I read that essay, a lot of people have used it as a derogatory term.
Sure.
In the essay makes it very clear that that's not how it's meant within the structure of the essay.
Sure.
It defines sheep as they are incapable of doing harm to another sheep except by accident.
Gotcha.
And that has a certain nobility of its own.
Sure.
And then there are wolves who actively prey on the sheep.
Yes.
And then there are sheepdogs who
Right.
protect the sheep from the wolves.
Sure.
Obviously, the formal ones, the official ones, are military and law enforcement.
Of course.
But a mother protecting her children is a sheepdog, right?
Yes.
You know, the teacher at Columbine, or I think it was Columbine,
Or Sandy Hook.
or Sandy Hook, yeah. You know,
who protected the kids
Protected the kids.
by keeping them safe.
yeah, total sheepdog, right? And because of my, you know, for whatever reason, my life has always kind of been that sheepdog role. I've repeatedly been in that position. You know, my first fight was in kindergarten, and me and two of my friends caught the class bully out behind the school and beat the tar out of him, right? And you know, by the time I was in second grade, I was giving other kids pointers on how to deal with bullies.
Right.
By the time I was in fifth grade, I was actively interceding. I would go up to the bully and go, "You got to leave this kid alone. You're making his life miserable."
Right.
You know,
Right.
And sometimes that meant I was in a fight. A surprising number of times it didn't.
Sure.
Surprisingly, a lot of the boys were like, "Really? I was just joking."
Yeah.
Man, I'll try and be more careful. You know.
Right.
You know, and as an adult, that's led to me working, you know, security gigs and bouncing.
Sure.
And whatever, and so that's what I try to. That's my personal focus is you know, the motto philosophy of AGPS is training for protection of self and others. That's what I focus on. That's what I try and, you know.
Right.
Lately, you know, I've had several opportunities over the years to work with military and law enforcement personnel, either privately or you know,
Seminar.
Yeah, or in seminars, and you know, I was asked to come up to Southern Indiana. I think it was 2003, 2005, something like that, to work with a group of National Guard MPs.
Sure.
You know, things like that, and I'm about to. It looks like I'm going to start teaching at a military law enforcement training facility in Missouri sometime in the next few months. I'll start. I'll go on staff there and start training. But yeah, it's all, you know. I train sheepdogs. That's how I look at it. I train people to give them skills and tools to help them protect themselves and others.
That's interesting. And the reason why I say that's interesting is actually twofold. I'll comment first on the first. In regards to the training presently that military as well as law enforcement or correctional officers receive, how do you perceive the current standards? Do you think that the current standards for training, and I won't limit it to one particular group, will say law enforcement and correctional as well as military, how do you feel that those particular standards are presented to date, and do you think that they need to be updated?
Definitely. Predominantly, with the individuals and the groups I've worked with, is severely lacking. It's what they receive officially has been dictated to them by bean counters, for the most part, who don't
Right.
have a clue what's needed. They've never been on the floor or in the field or whatever. So what they end up with is the flavor of the month, or for instance, and this isn't a knock on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Sure.
I trained in it for
Right.
about 8 months. I
Right.
respect it. It's
Right.
good stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that it's the right tool for air marshals. You've got a 2-foot aisle. There's not really any room to grab him and take him to the ground. And,
Right.
it's the wrong tool for the job.
Right.
But that's what they wound up. I don't know if they're still doing that, but I know that they were doing that for a while because that was the flavor of the day. That was
Right.
that was what the people making decisions. They'd seen it on TV and UFC and whatever.
Sure,
And they're like,
sure.
oh yeah, but that's not the right. They just didn't know. There's a lot of that. There's also a lot of, and it's not. It's human nature. Ultimately, is what it boils down to. The majority of people in those jobs, they're there because they have to be. They're there because it's a job. They're trying to put food on their family's table,
Sure,
whatever.
sure.
They're not, so they won't spend extra time researching things themselves, whatever.
Right.
And it's hard to say that without sounding like I'm putting them down, but I'm really not. That's just human nature. It's we all do that, and every day in our lives we make decisions based on what we need now.
Right.
And it's hard to look at the bigger picture sometimes.
Right.
But a lot of the guys I've worked with over the years, they're kind of the exceptions to that. The Spec Ops community, whether you're talking about military or SWAT or
Right,
whatever,
right.
those or CERT teams and corrections, whatever,
Sure.
it is those
Special
elites,
units,
the
yeah.
special units, the elites. They tend to be part of the reason they are elite. Part of the reason they're part of that is because they don't fall into that norm, and they're the ones who usually will go, okay, this is not adequate for this experience that I've had. I'm going to go seek something else.
Right.
So I've seen a lot of that, and but yeah, the basic formal training that they get in academy or in basic training or whatever, it needs to be updated.
So in regards to beyond the military and more into law enforcement and correctional, when you speak about systems such as like the mom and doc training, or what would be a pressure point control training or something of that nature, is it adequate, do you feel?
Kind of depends on what they're trying to use it for. I would say that and depending on which specific one but I would say that each of those has a place where it is adequate, where it is the proper tool for the job.
Sure.
I think though that a lot of again, I think a lot of it goes back to the administrators, the bean counters. They go, oh, we've got this program. Oh, we'll just train everyone in that.
Sure.
Even though it's ideally suited for this group.
Right.
This group it's worthless to them.
Right.
For a large part of a SWAT sniper.
Yeah.
Doesn't really need a lot of close range combatives.
Of course not. Right.
If he's in a close range fight, something has gone horribly wrong.
Right.
But the guys going through the door, they need that.
Right.
Right. But so often the people making decisions, they try to find one thing that they can, and they try and put everyone in that box, and it doesn't work. But they try and do that to save money, to whatever.
Right.
Unfortunately, the guys on the ground, their lives are being put at more risk than necessary
Right.
to save some money. That's often where it ends up, and it's a really unfortunate thing.
Where do you feel, and I guess carrying on from that, where do you feel that, and for my lack of ability to pronounce. So where do you feel the AGPS fits into a use of force scenario, much like the Monondoc or the pressure point or any of that training takes the law enforcement community or correctional community?
It covers a lot of ground as far as use of force. I can teach someone everything, and it's all the same material. The Filipino and Indonesian martial arts, more so than other things I've been exposed to, they take a very conceptual approach to things. So, in the Filipino arts, the way that I use my stick is the exact same motion as using a blade. It's the exact same motion as using
your hands.
empty hands. And so I do the same thing in my broader approach, where I teach the same thing, but it can be applied to if you it can be applied to basic get away from me. It can be applied to controlling. It can be applied to neutralization and to maiming, killing. And the motion is essentially the same. It's just what line you take or how much energy you put into it. So pretty much, what I focus on is all close range and generally extreme close range. Part of that is because of what I've trained, but mostly it's my own attributes. I was born cross-eyed, and because of that, I have poor depth perception. My depth perception is not literal. Most people have what's called stereoscopic vision. And so you take input from both eyes simultaneously, and you get depth out of the parallax between the two.
I see.
My eyes both function, but my brain doesn't work that way because of the cross-eyed issue. It has to learn a different modality. So I take input. My brain takes input from one eye, and then from the other, and so there's a time difference.
Time lapse.
And which means that I effectively see the world in 2D.
No 3D, no 4D, it's 2D.
And so for me, if I'm at, say, kicking range or long range with a stick, I probably can't tell when that thing's going to hit me.
So you're going to be closing very quickly.
Exactly. So I thrive in that in that close range where I've got I heard a Silat instructor phrase it this way once. Once I have these eyes on them, I don't need these eyes on them.
Gotcha.
And that's why I thrive in that environment where these are I've got tactile sensitivity
with
tactile
your hands
awareness.
as opposed to your eyes.
With my hands and body, and that's also a huge thing in especially the Silat, though the Filipino does it to some extent too. We're always thinking weapons and multiple opponents. And if I'm at long range, I have to be focused on my opponent. This is my awareness of this is going to suffer. But once I've closed and these are on my opponent, then I can be watching that guy.
This person is now your shield against everyone else.
And I know what he's doing without looking at him. These know what he's doing. I can be watching the guys out here and be looking for exits, looking for weapons, etc. So that's kind of where I thrive and mostly what I focus on. But within that, I can kind of cover the entire continuum of use of force. So yeah, it's what I as far as dealing with like law enforcement, military folks, my primary modality methodology is to give them tools to deal with. Okay, my sidearm jammed in the holster, or I've run out of ammo, or there's a jam in the functioning of the firearm itself. Or I got ambushed and I didn't have time to go for it, whatever. To deal with that immediate threat and create the time and space they need to get to a better weapon, whether it's their firearm, their car, their taser, whatever, their baton, whatever they have. But if they try and go for if I get ambushed and I try and go for my sidearm or my blade or whatever, I'm focusing on this, and they're beating the crap out of me.
Right.
Right. So, or killing me if they have a blade or something more lethal. So I kind of focus on that area where I have to deal with this. But I'm not really worried about finishing it with my empty hands.
Right.
I can if I have to, but with military and law enforcement, I'm focused more on create that time and space so your partner can get them, or your teammates can get them, or you can get to that firearm, or you can get to your other tools, or you can get to an exit, or whatever.
Sure.
And that's where my focus has been lately, dealing with those
Gotcha.
folks in those professions.
Gotcha. So back again and back around.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, where do you see Mike Casto being in the great scheme of the martial arts? What is your end game? What is your goal? What is your primary functioning goal? What do you feel your place is going to be?
That's a hard one. I think really I can't define it very clearly. The closest I can come is that I love teaching, and so the closest I can come is that I want to my goal ultimately is to help other people, give them the tools to protect themselves and others, but also to create others who can carry that on, and help people become teachers in their own right, who can help others. I kind of look at myself as a pebble being thrown into a pond. The more ripples I can create, the more people I affect. I love getting feedback from military or law enforcement or corrections or whatever, where they come back and say, what you taught me saved my life or saved my partner or whatever. I love that feedback, and the more that's what my personal goal is to generate as much of that as possible. The more people what I teach touches and helps, awesome. And one of the things that I know a lot of people who feel this way, but it's not the standard way that martial arts is perceived by the general public, nor presented to the general public, is that ultimately the reason I do what I do is love. It's love for myself, for my fellow, my partners, my friends, my community.
Right.
It's love for humanity in general. I don't fight. There's a quote. The warrior doesn't fight because he hates the enemy in front of him. He fights because he loves the people behind him. And ultimately, that's really how I see it. And so the more people I can help get to that place where they have the tools and that mindset, then really the more love there is. It sounds very mushy, I know, but I think being that pebble to pond, I'm doing what I can to ultimately help the larger community, help everyone get along better, and it's that's the best phrase I can phrase it.
Sure. I understand. So, in regards to AGPS, do you plan on standardizing that curriculum? Do you plan on further promoting it via video instruction, books, things of that nature? And how is that development coming along, and where do you see yourself in that process today?
Definitely. There is a standard curriculum for it, although I intentionally keep it fluid because life has changed. So I want it to be fluid and nothing's set in stone. So at this point I have one full instructor under me in AGPS, and he's been training with me for 10 or 11 years, something like that.
Uh-huh.
So when I put together AGPS, he already had he already had all the components. It was just a matter of, okay, here's how I'm putting it together. But he's also an instructor in Guro. He's a 7th dan in Guro, and he's an instructor in Sikal Silat
Uh-huh.
Sikal Silat Morin under George Morin,
Okay.
who is one of Willem de Toirs' seniors.
Okay.
And his name's Eddie, Guro Eddie Wells, and when Eddie moves, the Kuntao comes out. Some of the Goju comes out.
Sure.
I encourage that. I don't, because those are completely valid. Those are, that's his expression.
Right.
I try and keep things fluid to encourage that. If it doesn't look exactly how I do it, I really don't care as long as it works.
Right.
It works for you as long as it works for them.
Right.
I do. I'm attempting to put together curriculum videos, but because of the way my life is currently structured, I travel a lot, and it's really hard to
focus.
to focus. And even if I've shot the footage, I can't edit it except when I'm at home.
Right, and you're never at
Often
home. So.
Right, exactly. So most of, at this point, most of the video footage is stuff that I've put together, and it's either on my website or in the Facebook group for AGPS,
Right.
And some of it's on YouTube. And it's I'll be teaching here or there or whatever, or throw something together because someone's requested it, and I'll put it out there. And so that might end up evolving into curriculum videos over time, rather than a concentrated, formalized effort.
Gotcha. I understand completely. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Do appreciate you stopping by and having the conversation with us
Definitely.
today. Look forward to working out with you very shortly.
Definitely.
So, I'd like to call the interview to an end, and
Excellent.
great success to you in the progression of AGPS and continuing to be that sheepdog with
Thank
that
you.
sheepdog mentality.
Thank you.
Yeah.